Well, we can get started and I'll just let other participants in as they join. Just so everybody knows, this is going to be recorded, and then we will post the presentation and share it later on. I know many of you on here, but I'm Erin Gantz. I'm the Senior Director of Economic Development at the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance. And we are the grantee of the Foreign Trade Zone 147. And the trade zone covers 11 counties in South Central Pennsylvania. Berks is one of them. And Randy Campbell is the administrator of the Foreign Trade Zone 147, and is going to tell us more about the Foreign Trade Zone and the benefits. So Randy?
Well, good morning, everyone. Jim, do you have anything to share before we get started? You want me to jump right in?
Well, thanks, Randy, and thanks, Erin, for opening up the event here today. Welcome to everybody. As Erin just said, the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance administers this foreign trade zone in what's zone number 147. And as Erin indicated, it's 11 counties, including Berks. We have a number of companies that are part of this program, and we're excited for what they do every year in this region of Pennsylvania, but we'd love to see some Berks County companies also join the foreign trade zone as well. And that's the basis for putting this event together today, to give you as companies more information about FTZs and how they might be helpful to you from a tax standpoint, federal tax standpoint, and why there's a great benefit to be part of an FTZ. So Randy has been well experienced in administering this program across those 11 counties for many years. I have it in my notes how many years, Randy, but I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's many, many years. And it's been a very successful program for those companies that have participated. And we just want to make sure companies in Berks County, and then more broadly, as we provide this same kind of informational session to companies in the other 10 counties, that they're aware of the benefits of this program, so you can determine whether your particular company should participate or not. So hopefully this will be really informational and really provide some food for thought for you as a company as to whether the foreign trade zone program is right for you. So with that, Randy, thanks for your leadership over the years in administering this in zone 147, and turn it over to you now for the presentation.
Thank you, Jim. As we'll go through a couple of statistics here just to get you familiar with the zone as we're waiting for maybe some more people to come in. First of all, we keep using that term FTZ 147. The zones are given a number as they're created. So the United States Foreign Trade Zones Board gives a number in sequence as each zone is created. In 1988, FTZ 147 was created again as the 147th zone in the country. That number is closing in on 300 now. And those are zone projects. There are very many more zone sites within those projects, as we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I've been involved in zones for 27 years now. 22 of those exclusively in either foreign trade zones, United States foreign trade zones, or free zones as they're called worldwide. And with this specific project, first of all, I live in York County. Was involved in helping to expand the zone when I worked for York County Economic Development Corporation. Then took a stint down in Washington as the leader of the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones, and then came back about 18 years ago, I think, and started Campbell Trade Group and struck up the relationship to administer the zone here. So that's a little bit of background about me and the zone. So we're aware of these. These numbers are a little surprising to many, including customs and myself at times. The FTZ 147 is the 7th largest zone in the United States by volume of merchandise that transits the zone. that those imports that come in and then are shipped back out. 7th largest. And to put that into a little bit of perspective, we are behind the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of New York, Newark, and we have no petroleum processing or refining in our foreign trade zone. And petroleum refining is the largest use of the zone's program countrywide. And with the value of a barrel of oil, and those statistics are all calculated by the value of merchandise that comes in, that kind of gives you an idea of how strong the zone program is here in central Pennsylvania compared to, let's say, Houston, Texas. Our zone project has more merchandise flow through it than Houston, Texas, with all of the petroleum activity there. We are first in Pennsylvania, and it's by quite a long shot. We don't get exact numbers when the Foreign Trade Zone Board, the United States Foreign Trade Zone Board, puts together their statistics. As of the end of 2019, our zone had received somewhere between 10 and 25 billion dollars in merchandise in 2019. And I know that's a wide range. But the next closest zone in Pennsylvania is Philadelphia, Port of Philadelphia, with all of the activity there at the Deepwater Port and the petroleum refinery. They had $5 to $10 billion worth of merchandise run through their zone. So we are substantially larger in volume than our second largest zone in Pennsylvania, just to give you some kind of idea there. 64% of the merchandise in foreign trade zones is domestic merchandise. Now, domestic means that it was either grown or manufactured in the United States, or it could have been imported and then duty paid before going into a foreign trade zone. Customs considers both of those to be domestic items. In Pennsylvania, the two largest industries that use foreign trade zones are, number one, the pharmaceutical industry, and number two, the consumer electronic industry. And that accounts for about 70% of that 10 to 25 billion dollars that comes through FTZ 147. I do not have access to the comments, should you put comments, but if you have questions that are that pertain to the topic that I'm talking about currently, please type something out, and I think Aaron can probably see it and jump in and ask that question. If it's something that I'm going to cover later, I'll ask you to hold that question until then and make sure I cover it later. But if it's a clarification on what I'm saying at the time, we'll go ahead and ask that question at the time. So with all of that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so what is a foreign trade zone in the first place? I'm going to read you the definition, some excerpts out of the actual definition, and then explain what those mean. So it's a secured area located in or near a port of entry. Secured area means that there is security necessary and sufficient to secure the revenue of the United States and to secure the supply chain so that unauthorized persons or unauthorized merchandise isn't inserted into our secure supply chain. Security in a zone is relative to the type of product being used. So if we're handling diamonds, there's going to be a tremendous amount of security, or alcohol, there's going to be a tremendous amount of security. If we're using 20-ton steel castings, just not having a crane sitting beside that piece of metal might be enough security for customs. No one's going to put that in their pocket and walk away. So it's based on what the manner and nature of the product being used is. Located in or near a customs port of entry. It's a customs port of entry. We are situated near the Harrisburg Customs Port of Entry, and also the Philadelphia Customs Port of Entry. For foreign trade zone purposes, the location of most of the area of FTZ 147 is adjacent to both of those ports. But The controlling customs office for FTZ 147 is the Harrisburg Customs Port of Entry. When we say located in or near, Customs Port of Entry isn't necessarily just the office where customs is located, or the airport or the port. It's a geographically defined area. In our circumstance, Harrisburg Customs Port of Entry incorporates about half of Dauphin County, about half of Cumberland County, maybe a third of York County. Those are the boundaries of the port of entry itself. As far as foreign trade zones are concerned, we can operate in the regulations call it with adjacency. The adjacent requirement is within 60 miles or 90 driving minutes. So that's where the zone has been able to expand out and cover areas such as Fulton County and Juniata County in our service area. Merchandise held in a foreign trade zone is considered to be legally outside of the customs territory of the United States. That's the key to the entire program. The merchandise is considered to be legally outside of the customs territory of the United States. Even if it's here physically in the United States, it remains outside the customs territory. So therefore, the government doesn't have the authority to tax the merchandise. And that's where the benefits come from, mostly in the form of customs duty, or the taxes involved here. In a zone, I'm not going to read through the list. You can see it on your screen there. If you can perform the activity within the commerce of the United States, you can probably do that activity within a foreign trade zone if it makes sense for you to do so. There may be certain approvals necessary from the government to do those activities, but unless you're dealing with very restricted activities or merchandise, those activities can occur within zones. Very few absolute prohibitions. One of them is retail trade. Product cannot be sold directly out of a foreign trade zone. There are provisions for company stores that are located within facilities and those types of things, but retail trade directly out of a foreign trade zone is prohibited, as is living in a foreign trade zone. So if any of you could ever find a good reason to live in a foreign trade zone, you can't do that. Only customs officers are permitted to live in a foreign trade zone. And that goes back to 1934, when customs officers were on site at every foreign trade zone, and that's just never left the act or the regulations. Again, here's that list a little bit larger. Most of the activity in zones, especially in 147, center around the warehousing and distribution. So they're storing or exhibiting, maybe repacking, and distributing, performing quality assurance, all of those types of things. And that can be done relatively simply in a foreign trade zone. When we get to what the zone calls production or manufacturing, there are extra approvals necessary from the Foreign Trade Zones Board, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about those later. We have as big of a manufacturing history as Central Pennsylvania has. We have very little manufacturing in the zone. Our first zone users were manufacturers, but with the boom in distribution in Central Pennsylvania, most of the zones have moved off to the distribution functions. Catch up on a couple of the organizations that are involved in zones so that we know some of that lingo as we go forward here. So the non-governmental entities that are within zones, is number one is the grantee, and as Aaron was describing, the Greater Reading through the Foreign Trade Zone Corporation of Southern Pennsylvania, or FTZSP, as you'll hear it referenced. It's quasi-government, so everything's got an acronym. So the FTZSP is the actual grantee. They hold the grant of authority that was issued by the United States Foreign Trade Zones Board, and they hold that authority so that the zone can be operated and administered as using public utility principles. All activity for applications or for production authority, all of those applications go through the grantee on their way to the U.S. Foreign Trade Zones Board, so that the grantee has control over what happens within their zone to ensure that that activity is consistent with, number one, their grant of authority, and number two, with the values and mores of the community. Just an example there, the zone in Dulles, Washington, there's a zone located at the airport there. They prohibit firearms in their zone, and that's kind of a good thing. I'm not sure I would want rocket launchers being stored at the end of the runway when I'm flying in and out of Dulles. So, you know, if there are things that make sense in those certain zones, they can be prohibited locally. The operator is either a private corporation or it can be the grantee, but in every circumstance in FTZ 147, the operator is a separate corporation that contracts to operate the individual zone. They contract with the grantee to operate the individual zone. That contract doesn't fall under any type of foreign trade zone regulation or law. That's simply Pennsylvania contract law, but it gives the day-to-day oversight of the zone itself to the operator. So as grantee, we're not involved with hiring forklift drivers and moving merchandise and submitting forms to customs and paying duties. All of those things are contracted out to the individual operator. So if any of you find benefit in the zone and decide to move forward with the program, you would become an operator within the zone. Then the third participant, non-government participant is the user of the zone. In many cases, the user is the same as the operator, and that's usually the case in manufacturing zones. But in warehousing zones, the user may very well be a separate company from the operator. If you're a third-party warehouse operator and you're storing merchandise for other companies, those companies that have their merchandise stored within the foreign trade zone are the users, and the operator is the warehouse operator. Most manufacturers do not contract out to an outside operator. They keep those operations within themselves. They may hire consultants to perform certain functions for them, but they maintain control of the day-to-day operations of the zone themselves. As on that last line there, third-party warehouses, automobile manufacturers, petroleum refineries, computer, electronic production, shipbuilding, all of those different types of activities are part of the foreign trade zones, and many of them are both users and operators. Okay, more down to the reason why you're here in the first place. What is the advantage of using a foreign trade zone? Well, let's talk about that. First of all state and local laws are applicable in zones. There's no relief to zoning laws, to building codes, to labor laws, to state taxes, to income taxes. This only functions as a either reduction or elimination or some type of relief to customs related duties and taxes. There are three main types of benefits to a zone, and they all revolve around some type of enhanced cash flow. There are companies that will operate within a zone not having any of these three benefits, but 95% of the zones in the United States have some type of cash flow benefit in using the foreign trade zone program. I'll explain that a little bit more as we go forward. But there are three types of major benefits. That's duty deferral, deferring the customs duty, eliminating the customs duty, and that can happen in a couple different ways, or reducing the customs duties that the company becomes liable for when the product is imported. And just to help us understand the next couple of slides when we start talking about duty reduction and duty elimination, I want to explain the difference in manufacturing and manipulation. It can be different than what we would normally think of. The Foreign Trade Zone Board defines manufacturing as a change in the classification of the merchandise. So if you're familiar with importing, all merchandise has a code attached to it, the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States. There's a harmonized tariff number associated with every piece of material or goods that come into the United States. When that tariff number, that harmonized tariff number, is changed within the foreign trade zone, the Foreign Trade Zone Board considers that to be manufacturing. So let me go a little bit farther on that. I've got a pen and a mechanical pencil. My third-party my warehouse, I bring these pens in cases of 100, and I bring the mechanical pencils in cases of 100. Within my zone, I take a pen and the pencil and I put them in a gift box and then sell the gift box. I have changed the tariff classification of both of these. The pen had a tariff classification, the mechanical pencil had a tariff classification, and the gift box has a different tariff classification. So by virtue of the Foreign Trade Zone Board, I have manufactured in my zone. So what you would typically call kitting may in fact be considered manufacturing in a zone, and we need to be aware of that as we put together the benefits here. The other thing that is different from most other realms in the customs world or the importing world is merchandise that is brought into a foreign trade zone is assigned a status. And this is very important in determining which benefits apply and how they apply. So when merchandise is admitted into the zone, it can be domestic. And as I said before, that can either be made or grown in the United States, or it can be something that's duty paid and brought into the zone. Let's say an automobile manufacturer doesn't want to track, keep absolute track of the nuts and bolts. So even though they come from Germany, they'll prepay them on arrival, prepay the customs duties, and they'll become domestic merchandise, which don't need to be tracked as closely as foreign merchandise. That's the example there. Non-privileged foreign, let me reverse this, because privileged foreign is what's defined in the Act. And privileged foreign means that when the merchandise arrives at the foreign trade zone, the classification and the value are assigned at that time. So it will always be that product. So if I brought a pen and mechanical pencils in to my foreign trade zone and I put them into privileged foreign status, that pen would always be a pen and that mechanical pencil would always be a mechanical pencil, no matter what I did with it. When I made my entry into the United States, I would make entries on pens and entries on pencils, not on a gift set. If I declare non-privileged foreign, that means that I'm going to determine the classification and the value of that material when it comes out of the foreign trade zone. So I just bring in pens and pencils and then declare them to be a pen and pencil set when they come out of the foreign trade zone. That's the key to manufacturing, and I'll explain how that is important in just a minute. The last designation is zone restricted. Zone restricted means when you bring it into a foreign trade zone and you give it a zone restricted status, you can do nothing with it but destroy it or export it. There are very few times when zone restricted is used, and when it is used, it is nearly impossible to change. The zone restricted status has only been, if you want to change the status of zone restricted merchandise so you can sell it in the United States, you must petition the United States Foreign Trade Zone Board for that change. And in the history of the zone program, dating back to 1934, the Foreign Trade Zone Board has only issued that approval 12 times. So it's very, very unlikely that zone restricted status can be changed. If you're in a world where drawback is important to you, you can bring the product into the zone, declare it to be exported by virtue of giving it zone restricted status, and file immediately for your drawback claim, therefore speeding up that process a little bit. That's one of the interesting uses for zone restricted merchandise. Okay, enough of the technical stuff. Let's get down to why there is why there are benefits here. Duty deferral. When interest rates are low, naturally, this is not as much of a benefit as it is when interest rates are high. Personally, I'd rather have the lower interest rates and not have this to be the greatest benefit, but to each of their own, I guess. And duty deferral is simply the delay of the activity that happens when the product first arrives at the port of arrival in the United States to when it comes out of the foreign trade zone. So in general importing circumstances, when either a ship or an airplane or a truck or a train arrive at the US borders, there is a customs entry filed, and all of the duties and taxes associated with those goods are paid at that time on that customs entry. In the foreign trade zone, when you admit the product to a foreign trade zone, remember, it's not considered to be within the customs territory of the United States. It's still considered to be an international commerce. So the government doesn't have the authority to tax it. Therefore, you're pushing the time to when you pay those duties from the time that the merchandise first arrived in the United States until you ship it out of your foreign trade zone. So in this circumstance, we're bringing in breakers from Italy, and they have a duty rate of 5%. We store them in a foreign trade zone, and at this point, it doesn't matter whether they're privileged foreign or non-privileged foreign, as long as they're not zone restricted, we're okay here. There's no duties paid on those breakers, too many S's there, until they are sold and removed from the zone. My keyboard's sticking, so I've got extra S's there. But anyway, the duties are not paid until the product is removed from the foreign trade zone. So you have the use of that money that you would have paid to customs when the product arrived until you must give it to the government when the product leaves your foreign trade zone. So that time value of your cash is what is important there. Hence the greater value with the greater duty liability and the greater interest rates. One more thing to keep in mind with these benefits as we talk about them, they're not exclusive. There are many circumstances where all three of these major benefits that we're going to talk about can be used together on the same product or in the same activity. So duty elimination was the second one we talked about. This can occur in several different ways. But duty elimination is really what it says is there is no duty payment on the goods that you imported into your foreign trade zone. So here the breakers from Italy with a duty rate of 5% are stored in the zone. Again, it doesn't matter at this point if they're privileged foreign or non-privileged foreign. If those breakers are exported out of the United States, no duty is payable. No US duty is payable because they never entered the commerce of the United States and the government didn't have the authority to tax them. This is also a situation where the company is performing quality assurance examinations at their facilities. The product that doesn't pass quality assurance can be either destroyed or returned without customs duties being paid. So you have the ability to destroy merchandise within your foreign trade zone and not pay duty. With the permission of customs, naturally. That also goes to waste. And there's a difference between scrap and waste in a foreign trade zone, but for waste, parts of an activity that are not recoverable and have no value are not dutiable. If there's a chemical reaction that happens to your product and some of it goes up up through the smokestack, and through your air filters, but it's not recoverable and usable, you never are liable for the duties and taxes on that product that that was used in the process. It doesn't matter whether there's something that happens to the product at any point along the supply chain. It can be at any point before it's entered into the commerce of the United States. So it's already arrived, it's on its way to your facility, and the truck has an accident, and then everything's all over the highway. You don't pay the customs duties. It burns down in a catastrophic event at your facility. You don't pay the customs duties. Your forklift driver is thinking about the bowling tournament later that evening, runs the forks through the pallet. You don't have to pay the customs duties on those. So anytime that the product doesn't enter the commerce of the United States, either through export or through non-usable materials. For manufacturing, the key is it comes through what is called duty reduction or inverted tariff, or as a good friend of mine calls it, irrational tariff structure. In many cases, in the harmonized tariff schedule, the duty rates for finished products are lower than the duty rates for the component products. And it just doesn't make any sense. That encourages the importation of finished products rather than importing the components and manufacturing here. So that's where the irrational term comes from. The zones program remedies that situation, and in many other cases, the zones program remedies those types of unintended consequences of trade agreements. This became really prevalent in the 70s when the United States was entering into the trade agreements with Japan for automobile importations and manufacturing and movement of the parts for Japanese automobiles. The situation arose through those agreements that it ended up that the duty rates on the finished automobiles were lower than the component products. So the zone program came into effect as with the ability to save the United States jobs and create United States jobs by bringing that manufacturing here to the United States. That's when we saw Nissan open its plant in Smyrna, Tennessee. That's when the Toyota and Acura started manufacturing in Ohio. Mercedes went to Alabama. BMW went to South Carolina. Those brought all of those manufacturing plants here. And the way it works is this is where the non-privileged foreign and privileged foreign status designations come into effect. So breakers from Italy arrive with a duty rate of 5%, are brought into the foreign trade zone. Those breakers are manufactured into treadmills. This was actually a use in FTZ 147, by the way. So the breakers are manufactured into treadmills in the zones. The duty rate on a finished treadmill is 2%. So by importing those breakers into a foreign trade zone, putting them into the treadmills in the zone, and making the entry on the treadmill, effectively the company reduced the duty liability from 5%, duty liability of those breakers from 5% to 2%. Now, the thing to remember here is duty is never assessed on the value of value added within the zone, whether that be labor, overhead, domestic product that is part of the combination. That is never assessed. Duties are never assessed it's only assessed on the value of the foreign components. So when when a customs entry was made on these treadmills, and these were treadmills that cost $10,000, $15,000. Ridiculous. I can't imagine. It's just ridiculous to me the number of people that actually bought these, that the company would be in business for this. But anyway, it did. And they would manufacture these treadmills. The breakers of the electronics changed some of the programming so that each treadmill was for a unique use. So they put these breakers into the treadmills in the foreign trade zone. When they filed their customs entry, the value on the customs entry was only the value of the breakers. So it may be that that treadmill costs $15,000, but the customs entry that was filed was for $2,500 because that was the cost of that breaker, not including any domestic material or value added. And to bring that one a little bit closer to home, something we can all wrap our heads around. BMW operates a foreign trade zone in South Carolina. The X3 or the Z3, the little sports car, is exclusively made in South Carolina. All of that car, with the exception of the engine, the remaining parts, except for the engine, are manufactured in the United States. They're domestic materials. The engine is the only thing that's foreign. An automobile has a duty rate of 2.5% if it were imported from outside the United States. So they manufacture the cars in the foreign trade zone, import the engines from Germany, put the engine into the vehicle. When the vehicle comes off of the assembly line, there's a customs entry made for a automobile with the value of that engine. So not the $25,000 cost of the BMW, it's the value of the engine itself, and the duties are only payable on that engine as if it were an automobile. So they're not paying the 5%, they're paying the 2.5% that they would have paid if they imported the finished automobile. That's how the duty reduction or the inverted tariff structure works. There are many circumstances where the finished products have a 0 duty rate, but component parts have a duty rate attached to them. By manufacturing within the foreign trade zone, the company completely eliminates any duty liability by virtue of this use of non-privileged foreign status, assigning non-privileged foreign status to the components when they come into the foreign trade zone, which means they haven't assigned them a classification or a value. They assign the classification and the value as the finished product as it leaves the foreign trade zone, and the duties are assessed on the value of the foreign components that leave the foreign trade zone. So if that finished product is 0, it's free of duty, then there are no duties paid on any of the component parts either, because you're not importing the component parts. At that point, you're importing the finished product. Those are the 3 main benefits that most companies will need to have either enough of a savings through use of those 3 benefits to justify the costs and risks of using the program. But there are a few other logistical type activities that either tip the balance or in some cases are really the only use of the foreign trade zone. Let's talk a little bit about them. Some of these other benefits that I'm talking about are it eliminates certain quota and visa issues. Product that is subject to a quota, a quantitative quota, can come into the foreign trade zone and be held there until the quota opens. The time the quota opens, the entry is filed, the merchandise is already here in the United States, and it has to be here in order for an entry to be made. So by holding that merchandise in a foreign trade zone, the company can be gaining a couple days lead time on their competitors that would be importing the same product. The time that the quota opens, they file the entry and they start shipping the next day. There are no time constraints on storage. Let's say a bonded warehouse, the product must leave the bonded warehouse within 5 years. In a foreign trade zone, it can stay as long as the zone is activated with customs and that you can maintain the paperwork. Problem with these shorter seminars is I've got thousands of stories I can share on these, but in an hour I can't get to them. Direct delivery allows product to flow, as it says, directly from the port of arrival to the foreign trade zone without intervention by customs and inspections by customs at the port. If customs wants to inspect the merchandise, they'll inspect it at your foreign trade zone rather than at the port facility, so that allows it to move off of the out of the port quicker, and can save money in paying stevedores to stuff and unstuff containers for customs to inspect. Weekly entries, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that one, so I'm not going to go into that right now. I think that's the next slide. Improved inventory control. Everybody fights me on this one. Oh, our inventory control, we've got it covered. There's no problem there. In a zone, you have to account for every piece of merchandise, or customs considers it to be a piece of foreign merchandise and collects duties on it. So if you brought in 100 pieces of anything, you must be able to account for 100 pieces, because you're going to pay duty on what you can't account for. So it's no longer that right before Joe's break, as he's unloading the trailer, he sets a pallet off to the side, runs and gets his coffee, comes back, forgets about that pallet, unloads the rest of it. 2 weeks later, somebody discovers a pallet in the corner of the warehouse and doesn't know what it is. That can't happen in a foreign trade zone, or the company is responsible for the duties. So there are better inventory control processes implemented within zones. Duty deferral on production equipment, very quickly. If you import machinery that will be used in manufacturing or production within your zone, you can defer the duties on those machines until the machines are installed, tested, and used in production. So let's say there's a big piece of machinery that you have to build your facility around. You can put the equipment, you can import the equipment, declare it to be in the foreign trade zone, create a zone there, put it into the foreign trade zone, build around it, and you don't pay the customs duties on that equipment until you start to use it in production. So if that takes a couple years or a year, you're delaying those duties. You ultimately pay the duties, but you have the ability to delay them, and that goes for machinery that comes in parts, in pieces as well. It doesn't all have to be in one piece. Let's jump over to weekly entry. There are many of the zones and all of the large distribution centers in FTZ 147 are in the zone because of this change that happened to the zone in 2001. We call it weekly entry. Very basically, weekly entry is the ability to take all inbound shipments that arrive during 1 week and count them as one entry when they go out of the zone. So it allows the company to either distribute or manufacture all week and file one customs entry instead of an entry every day. And we're going to talk here now why that's such a big savings. We don't need that. The basic explanation for that is good enough for right now. But so let's make an assumption that your entry, the cost of filing an entry by your broker is $75 each time you file an entry. And for the sake of the discussion here, you're getting a receipt of inbound merchandise on a separate entry, one shipment every day, every working day of the year. So those 260 days times, or 260 shipments times $75, you would be paying your customs broker $19,500 a year in filing the paperwork for importing that merchandise. Using the foreign trade zone, all of those receipts that occur in 1 week get rolled up into one customs entry. So you're paying that $75 once a week rather than once a day. And I'm not sure this is going to work here, but yes, it does. So the savings ends up to be $15,600 a year, and you didn't do anything different than as far as your operations go. You've reduced your paperwork, you've reduced your interaction with your customs broker, and your manufacturing process or your distribution process didn't change at all. So that's one piece of it. There's a second fee, an additional fee. There are several charged on the importation of product: customs duties themselves, the merchandise processing fee, and the harbor maintenance fee if the product comes through a deep water port. So the merchandise processing fee is the one that really gets the high volume importers. It's required on all imports except from those from Canada and Mexico and some of the GSA countries, so the Caribbean country where we have special relationships. Some of those don't require the merchandise processing fee, but in general, 0.3464% of the value of your imports are paid to customs in what's called the merchandise processing fee, or the MPF, for each shipment that arrives. Those fees are capped at 400. That's wrong. I didn't change it. It was just updated this year. That caps at $525.33. I think is the top rate for the MPF. So the most you can pay in any given day is 500 and some odd dollars. Anything that your shipment of is more valuable than that, you can't pay any more. You can only pay less if your shipment is under about $220 in value. So let's use that same situation where you're bringing in a shipment every day, every working day, and I made the change on this one. So you multiply those merchandise processing fees by $528 per entry, assuming that the entries are of the value of about $220,000 each. You're paying merchandise processing fees of $137,280 just to cover the cost of customs processing the paperwork. In a zone, you file one customs entry a week, so an entry is an entry is an entry. So everything is considered to be one entry, including the cap. So you make one customs entry with all your merchandise that you ship out that entire week. It caps at $528 for that merchandise processing fee payment. So you end up with your MPF liability at $27,000 and some change for the course of that year, which is a savings of almost $110,000 for not changing your process at all, just for operating within the foreign trade zone, and a little bit of change to your paperwork processing, but no change to your normal importing practices, manufacturing processes, your warehouse processes, or your shipping processes. Like I said, all of the major distribution zones use the zone for the weekly entry process, as does smaller companies. Clark Shoes in Adams County has substantial savings and merchandise processing fees. The amount of savings that you can achieve through the zone program that makes it valuable enough of a program for your company is really company dependent. There's no magic number that says if we import this amount of money or this value of merchandise, or we pay this value of this amount of duties. There is no magic number. It's to when the zone makes sense. It's when it makes sense for you. I've been told by companies that had $1 million a year savings in the zone that it wasn't important enough because it was only about a 1% of their expenses, so it wasn't worth the activity. Down to family owned businesses where just the deferral of paying the customs duties from March to July was a great enough value in cash flow that they moved forward with the zone program. So it really is company dependent, and we can talk individually about whether it makes sense for you. A couple other entities that I've thrown out the language or the titles: Customs Port Director. All of the activity for the foreign trade zone in 147 goes through the Customs Port of Harrisburg. So the port director, right now it's It's a woman by the name of Michelle Stover, is the port director there. She acts as, in addition to being the customs officer, being the eyes and ears for the United States Foreign Trade Zones Board in Washington to oversee the zone program for the government on the local levels. So she acts as the representative of the board, reviews port policy, comments on all the applications. She has to approve all of the zone procedures, approve of creating a zone. Customs requires an operator's bond, which is very similar to an importer's bond. They can assess penalties and damages if necessary. They can suspend the operations in a foreign trade zone, but they can't revoke the grant of authority. Only the United States Foreign Trade Zone Board can do that. I took out most of the discussion about the Foreign Trade Zone Board because we just don't have enough time today to get into that. And quite honestly, as individual companies, your interaction with the Foreign Trade Zone Board in Washington would come through the grantee. Most of your interaction with the grantee, if not all of it, other than paying the fees to the grantee, would come through Campbell Trade Group as well. So as you're looking at creating a zone or considering creating a zone, we are here to help answer questions. We can do a cost-benefit analysis for you. All of that is covered in our contract with the Greater Reading and FTZ 147, and we'll take you to the point of making that business decision whether to move forward with the Foreign Trade Zone program or not. But the grantee does not cover the cost of creating an application for you. That last piece, the direct delivery, these are the last piece, and we already talked about this. This is the ability to move the merchandise directly to your foreign trade zone from the port of arrival. Something I probably didn't mention is it doesn't matter where in the country your merchandise arrives. It goes to the foreign trade zone in bond, so you can bring it into the West Coast and have it travel by train to Central Pennsylvania, or by truck to Central Pennsylvania, or by train to Detroit and then truck to Central Pennsylvania, or it can come in through Philadelphia or Newark or Baltimore. The point is, it doesn't matter. The merchandise can come to you in any way, and then it comes to your facility by bonded carrier and is admitted into the zone there. Direct delivery is something that requires a prior approval from the government, from customs, and normally the customs will require some type of track record with them, either that your company has been in business for quite some time and customs has a history with you, or that you operated your zone for 6 months or a year, so they are comfortable as to what can happen. But that's basically the only piece of the zone program that customs can tell you no. Everything else is they really must act within the scope of the regulation there.
Hey, Randy.
That's what I've got for today.
Randy, we have a question. Is there any benefit from the FTZ concerning exclusions from the 25% tariffs on Chinese imports?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's the classic consultant answer of it depends. And it depends on the individual circumstances. There was a specific exclusion written into the executive order when those Section 301 duties were implemented, as well as the 232 steel and aluminum duties, where it says that product that is subject to those punitive damages must be admitted into the foreign trade zone in privileged foreign status. What that means is when it comes into the zone, the classification and the value and the duty liability is set at the time that it comes into the zone. it can't change from non-privileged or from privileged foreign. So the government has set up the program, set up that that executive order so that you cannot use the foreign trade zone program to circumvent those 301 or 232 duties if you are going to ultimately ship the product into the United States. If you're going to export the product, it comes into your zone and then it's exported, you will never have to pay those penalty duties on merchandise that is exported. So it's kind of an individual circumstance. And it's also, there's some uncertainty in many of the penalty duty type situations like anti-dumping or countervailing duties that are assessed by customs or the U.S. Trade Representative. When those programs expire or that dumping order expire, the duties go away. So if you had this actually happened a couple of years ago. There was a dumping order on tires that came from China, and there was a tire manufacturer who was importing their passenger tires from China. They brought them into a foreign trade zone, and the day that the anti-dumping order ended, they entered all of those tires and didn't have to pay the anti-dumping duties. If they would have made entry on those tires into the commerce of the United States the day before or the week before, they would have had to pay those anti-dumping or countervailing duties. So in historically, you've been able to use the zone to wait it out, but they specifically addressed that in the executive order that you can't do that in the zone. We've been waiting for a couple of years, hoping that they would reverse that stance, but they haven't.
Randy, what is the time frame people could anticipate if they're interested in the foreign trade zone, you know, from start to entry?
Without going into a long dissertation, the zone program changed when FTZ 147 adopted the alternative site framework. So it went from about 18 months to create a zone site to less than 60 days. There, in fact, have been several times when an application has been filed on a Thursday and the approval has come the following Tuesday. So that creates the zone site. If there is production or manufacturing involved, there's a separate application that's filed with the Foreign Trade Zone Board. That takes, at a minimum, 180 days. If it's a process that is very familiar to the zone program, meaning it's been used over and over and over, that same process, the board will give temporary approval, but the official approval won't come for at least 180 days. So even, let's just say the simplest form, you're going to use a warehouse to bring in product and distribute them or export them. So you create the zone with the Foreign Trade Zone Board. It takes 2 weeks probably to write the application, and then up to 60 days for the Foreign Trade Zone Board to approve it. The second step is to activate the zone with Customs and Border Protection. That is on a local level, and Customs will inspect the facility so that it meets their security standards. They will conduct an FBI level background investigation on the people in your zone that have access to the inventory records or could cause the inventory records to be changed, not on the forklift drivers or the factory workers, but it's mostly on office personnel at that point. And then there's training involved and a procedure manual that Customs has to approve. All of that can take up to 180 days. I think the longest it's taken for a simple project here was 60 days. Customs here is very, very reactive. So all in all, it would be possible to, from the day that an application was filed with the Foreign Trade Zone Board to the point where you could receive merchandise in zone status, 90 days is probably the best you could expect. And depending on complexity, it'll go, you know, longer from there.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the group?
Randy, I have one question.
Sure.
I was the one that asked the first question. I import containers of product from office furniture product from China into my warehouse, do some processes on it. A lot of it is unfinished goods, and we finish them here and then sell them out, wholesale and retail. My questions really are, is there any, I don't know if this is in your purview, but any view of when the 25% tariffs might go away, or any way of getting exemptions or exclusions from those tariffs?
The time to file for exclusions has passed. There was a process built into the regulation. So if others in your industry didn't file for those exemptions, you know, that time has passed. The answer to how long they're going to be in place is, I had not expected them to stay very long with the change of administration. But I've heard nothing, no backroom talk or discussion that the Biden administration is looking to remove those in any short order. Jim, I don't know if you've heard anything different than that, but I have. It's been pretty silent in the zone world.
Just the general reporting is right now the Biden administration is maintaining all of the current rules, trade rules with regard to China, although that's going to be the topic of a lot of their discussion coming up in their summit. But at the moment, everything is status quo, as best I understand.
Yeah, it's pretty hard for them to probably walk away from that kind of revenue.
Yeah.
It's significant.
Yes.
I think it's a few $100 billion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Randy, thank you so much for this presentation. I learned a lot, and I've been familiar with the foreign trade zone for several years, so I really appreciate your knowledge and real life examples. And again, this is recorded, so we'll be sharing this recording with other companies. And I assume you're okay with people contacting you, since your contact information is up there if they have any other specific questions. And certainly the cost benefit analysis is something that, you know, could be another next step.
Yes, please. It's usually easier to catch me with email. Gives me time to process what you're asking. So email is usually the best, although you can call me too. Any question that comes to mind, whether it was a result of thinking over what's happened here today or something else that comes to mind. If it's not even if it's not related to zones, if it's just related to trade in general, I may not be able to answer it, but I can get you to somebody that can get you the answer for that. So I'm happy to do that as well. And as Aaron said, if you believe that there is a use for your company based on what we've said today, be more than happy to work up a cost benefit analysis for you. I've got a Word document that has maybe 12 questions that with the answers to those questions, I can get pretty close to what the savings may or may not be for you, and whether it would be proper to move forward with his own project now, or to keep watch as things change to see if there's a use coming down the road.
Thank you, Randy. Thanks for all the participants as well, and appreciate the great information. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your day.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.